12 trillion, that is the number. It is not a typo. It is not an exaggeration. And it is certainly not a theory. It is the exact calculated value of the alternative financial infrastructure that China has quietly constructed over the last decade to do one specific thing: destroy the United States dollar. While you were worried about inflation at the grocery store, while you were distracted by political theater, and while the mainstream media kept telling you that the dollar is too big to fail, something catastrophic happened in the shadows. In the last 60 days, the People's Bank of China didn't just sell US Treasury bonds. That's old news. Selling bonds is stage 3 behavior. We are past that. What they just initiated is far more dangerous. They have begun the systemic activation of a 12 trillion shadow economy, a completely separate global operating system that allows half the world's population to trade, bank, and build wealth without ever touching a single US dollar. This isn't a challenge to the dollar. This is an eviction notice. And the terrifying part? It's already working. As you listen to this, billions of dollars in oil trades are settling in UN. Thousands of tons of gold are moving from west to east. And the Project mBridge digital currency system is processing transactions that completely bypass the Western banking system. The exorbitant privilege that allowed Americans to print money, export inflation, and live beyond their means for 50 years is mathematically ending. Not in a decade. Now, by the end of this video series, you won't just understand how it's happening. You will understand the 4-stage historical pattern that guarantees the outcome. You will see why the $12 trillion figure is the mathematical tipping point. And you will know exactly why the collapse of the dollar system will happen faster than anyone in Washington is willing to admit. They call it De-Dollarization. I call it the controlled demolition of the American way of life. And the detonator has just been pressed. To understand why $12 trillion is the number that breaks the camel's back, you have to stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like a historian. Most people believe that empires die in battle. They think of Rome burning, or Nazi Germany being crushed by tanks. But that is not how economic empires die. Economic empires die by suicide. They die when the tool that gave them power, their currency, is weaponized against them by a rising rival. This is not the first time this has happened. It is the fourth. For the last 500 years, there has been a precise, unbreakable cycle that governs the rise and fall of reserve currencies. It is a mathematical pattern that plays out with the regularity of the tides. Stage 1 is the foundation. This is where the empire is built. Hard money, strong manufacturing, high savings. The world trusts you because you are rich and productive. For the US, this was 1944 to 1971. We owned the gold, we made the cars, we were the creditor to the world. Stage 2 is the weaponization. This is where the rot sets in. The empire gets lazy. It stops making things and starts financing things. It uses its currency not as a medium of exchange, but as a weapon of war. Sanctions, asset freezes, forcing the world to use your money or starve. This was the US from 1971 to 2022. We printed trillions, exported our inflation, and dared the world to do something about it. Stage 3 is the alternative. This is the phase the media ignores until it is too late. The rest of the world, tired of being bullied and tired of your inflation, quietly starts building a lifeboat. They don't attack you. They just build a parallel system. They accumulate gold. They sign bilateral trade deals. They build their own payment networks. This has been China from 2013 to 2024. Building the Belt and Road, hoarding gold, creating the anti-dollar. Stage 4 is the switch. This is the final stage. The rising power realizes their alternative system is big enough. It is robust enough. It is ready. They flip the switch. They demand payment in their own currency. They dump your debt. The network effect that protected the old currency reverses instantly. Everyone rushes for the exit at the same time. We have just entered stage 4. The activation of this $12 trillion de-dollarization grid is the signal. China is no longer preparing for a post-dollar world. They are enforcing it. And just like the Spanish real, the Dutch guilder, and the British pound before it, the US dollar is about to face the one thing it cannot survive: a viable alternative. You need to understand the scale of what is happening. When I say $12 trillion, I'm not talking about a pile of cash. I'm talking about a coordinated multi-vector economic weapon designed to sever the veins of the US financial system. It is composed of 3 specific parts: $4 trillion in hard asset reserves, gold, strategic metals, and energy contracts that back the yuan, contrasting with the debt-backed dollar. $5 trillion in shadow banking, swap lines, currency agreements with Russia, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and 40 other nations that allow them to trade without SWIFT. $3 trillion in digital infrastructure. The mBridge CBDC platform and CIPS payment system that make the US Treasury as sanctions literally impossible to enforce. This is not a recession. A recession is a storm. This is climate change. The US economy is built on one assumption, that the world must buy our debt to trade. If you want oil, you need dollars. To get dollars, you buy US Treasury bonds. This allows us to run $34 trillion in debt and simply print money to pay for it. But what happens when the world can buy oil with yuan? What happens when they can trade wheat for rubles? What happens when the $12 trillion alternative system offers them a better deal? Demand for dollars evaporates. Interest rates spike to 15%. Inflation hits 20%, 30%, 50%. The American standard of living, which is subsidized by foreign lending, collapses. This is the mechanism. This is the trap. And China has spent 20 years building it. Now, let me prove to you that this isn't just theory. Let me take you back to the years 1925 and 1956 to show you exactly how the British Empire collapsed under the weight of this exact same pattern. Because if you think America is immune, you are making the same mistake every failing empire makes right before the end. The historical proof. The rule of three. You might be sitting there thinking, this sounds terrifying, but America is different. We have the aircraft carriers. We have Silicon Valley. The dollar is invincible. That is exactly what a British banker would have told you in 1914. That is exactly what a Dutch merchant would have told you in 1720. That is exactly what a Spanish aristocrat would have told you in 1580. They were all wrong. They all lost everything. Because they didn't understand the rule of three. The rule of three states that in the modern economic era, this specific cycle of de-dollarization, or de-reserve status, has happened exactly 3 times. Each time, the dominant power believed it was eternal. Each time, a rising rival built an alternative system. And each time, the collapse happened not in decades, but in months. Let me take you through the archives. We are going to look at the 3 autopsies of dead empires, and you are going to see that the 12 trillion weapon China has built is the exact same knife that killed them all. Case study. 1. The British Empire, the Suez Moment. Most people think the British Empire ended because of soldiers. It didn't. It ended because of a bank run. From 1815 to 1914, the pound sterling was God. It was the dollar of its day. 60% of global trade was invoiced in pounds. London was the center of the universe. Stage 1, ascension. Britain was the workshop of the world. They made the textiles, the ships, the steel. They ran a trade surplus. The world trusted the pound because it was as good as gold. Stage 2, weaponization, overextension. Then came the wars. World War I and World War II bankrupt the nation. Britain went from being the world's creditor to its biggest debtor. By 1945, their debt to GDP was over 200%. But they kept acting like a superpower. They kept spending. They kept intervening in foreign countries. Stage 3, the alternative. While Britain was bleeding money, the United States was quietly building the alternative. We accumulated 80% of the world's gold. We built the world's biggest manufacturing base. We created the Bretton Woods system. We built the trap. Stage 4, the switch. The collapse happened in a single week in 1956, the Suez Crisis. Britain tried to invade Egypt to seize the Suez Canal. They thought they were still the boss. President Eisenhower didn't send troops to stop them. He did something much more violent. He weaponized the debt. The U.S. threatened to dump its massive holdings of pound sterling bonds. We told Britain, withdraw from Suez, or we will crash your currency tomorrow. Britain panicked. The pound collapsed. They withdrew in humiliation. In that moment, everyone saw the truth. Britain was no longer the superpower. The dollar was. The pound lost its reserve status, and the British economy went into a 30-year decline of inflation and stagnation. China is studying this. They know that today, they are Eisenhower and we are Britain. They hold our debt. They control the supply chain. They have the power to trigger a Suez moment whenever they choose. Case study 2. The Dutch Republic, the credit collapse. Go back further. 1600s, the Dutch guilder. If you lived in 1650, Amsterdam was New York too. The Dutch East India Company was richer than Apple and Microsoft combined. The Bank of Amsterdam was the Federal Reserve. The pattern. The Dutch got rich. Stage 1. Then they got arrogant. Stage 2. They fought endless wars with France and England. They started living on credit. The smart money in London started building an alternative system. Stage 3. They copied Dutch banking. They built a stronger navy. They offered a safer place for capital. The collapse. Stage 4. It happened in 1795. When the French army approached, the secret got out. The Bank of Amsterdam didn't have the gold. They had lent it all to the government and the East India Company. The guilder became worthless overnight. The financial center of the world moved from Amsterdam to London in a heartbeat. The Dutch Golden Age didn't fade away. It vanished. Case study 3. The Spanish Empire, the inflation death. 1500s. The Spanish real, the first global currency. 3. Spain owned the Americas. They had mountains of silver. They were untouchable. The pattern, they thought the silver would never run out. So they stopped making things. They bought everything from abroad. They fought wars in the Netherlands, France, and Italy simultaneously. They racked up massive debts to Italian and German bankers. The collapse. The bankers realized Spain couldn't pay. They realized the alternative, the efficient, productive economies of the North, was a better bet. Spain defaulted in 1557, 1575, 1596, 1607, 1627, and 16475. The world's richest empire became a pauper. Why? Because they relied on money instead of productivity. They thought owning the gold was enough. It wasn't. Do you see the reflection? Look at the United States today. Like Spain, we have stopped making things and rely on financialization. Like the Dutch, we are fighting proxy wars we cannot afford, funded by debt. Like Britain, we have a rising rival, China, that holds the pink slip to our economy. But the situation today is actually worse. Britain had the US as a friendly ally to take over. We spoke the same language, we shared values. The Dutch had the British, similar culture. We have China. China does not want to be our friend. They do not want to inherit the system. They want to bury it. The $12 trillion de-dollarization machine isn't just a lifeboat, it's a battering ram. China has looked at 1956. They have looked at 1795. They have looked at 1557. They have learned the lesson: you don't defeat an empire by fighting its armies. You defeat it by breaking its bank. In the next section, I'm going to show you exactly how the $12 trillion machine works. I'm going to pop the hood on the shadow economy China has built. We are going to talk about the petroyuan. We are going to talk about the gold exchange. And we are going to talk about the digital currency bridge that makes US sanctions obsolete. The trap is set, and we are walking right into it. The mechanism. Inside the 12 trillion machine, we have talked about the history. We have talked about the threat. Now, I'm going to take you inside the machine. When I say China has built a $12 trillion de-dollarization grid, I'm not using a metaphor. I'm describing a physical and digital infrastructure that exists right now. For 50 years, the United States had a monopoly on the plumbing of the global economy. If you wanted to move money, you used SWIFT. If you wanted to price oil, you used the petrodollar. If you wanted to store wealth, you bought US Treasuries. It was a walled garden. And we held the only key. But over the last decade, China didn't just pick the lock. They built an entirely new house next door. The $12 trillion figure comes from 3 specific vectors of attack. Let's break them down one by one. Vector 1. The petroyuan, the energy assassin. Estimated value, $5 trillion. This is the heart of the American empire. In 1974, Henry Kissinger made a deal with Saudi Arabia. The US would provide military protection, and in return, the Saudis would price every barrel of oil in US dollars. That deal forced every nation on earth to hold dollars. If you wanted energy, you needed our currency. It created artificial demand that allowed us to print infinite money without hyperinflation. That deal is dead. In 2023, China and Saudi Arabia signed a comprehensive strategic partnership. For the first time in history, the Saudis are open to accepting yuan for oil. They are already doing it with smaller partners. But China went a step further. They launched the petroyuan. Here's how it works. A nation sells oil to China. China pays in yuan. That nation can then take those yuan and immediately convert them into physical gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Do you see the brilliance of this? The US offers paper for oil, dollars that we print out of thin air. China offers gold for oil, yuan backed by physical metal access. Which deal would you take? The world is choosing the gold. Vector 2, the Shanghai shock, the hard asset trap. Estimated value, $4 trillion. While Wall Street plays games with paper gold, futures contracts and derivatives that outnumber physical gold bars 100 to 1, China has been draining the physical vaults of the West. The Shanghai Gold Exchange, SGE, is now the largest physical gold trading hub in the world. Unlike London or New York, where you trade a claim on gold, in Shanghai, you trade the metal itself. Why does this matter? Because the US dollar is a fiat currency. It is backed by nothing but faith. The Chinese financial system is quietly pivoting to a commodity-backed standard. They are accumulating copper, lithium, grain, and gold. They are pricing these commodities in yuan. When the crash comes, the US will have trillions of dollars of debt. China will have warehouses full of the stuff you actually need to build civilization. They are shorting the dollar and going long on reality. Vector 3, Project Enbridge, the digital guillotine. Estimated value, $3 trillion. This is the vector that keeps the CIA awake at night. For decades, the US used SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, as a weapon. If a country disobeyed us, like Iran or Russia, we kicked them off SWIFT. It was a financial death sentence. China realized this was their greatest vulnerability, so they built the digital guillotine to cut SWIFT out of the picture. It is called Project M-Bridge. It is a collaboration between the Bank of International Settlements and the central banks of China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE. It uses central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, to settle trades instantly, peer-to-peer. No U.S. banks involved, no U.S. regulations involved, no U.S. ability to see, stop, or sanction the transaction. If Brazil wants to sell soy to China, they use M-Bridge. The transaction happens in seconds. The cost is near zero. And Washington, D.C. doesn't even know it happened until the ship docks. This system is live. It is processing real money, and it renders the primary weapon of U.S. foreign policy, economic sanctions, completely useless. The perfect storm. Now put these three things together. Energy is no longer priced exclusively in dollars. Gold is moving from west to east to back the new system. Digital rails allow the world to trade without American permission. This is the $12 trillion machine. It is a fully functioning parallel global economy. And here's the scary part. It doesn't need to replace the dollar 100% to destroy us. It only needs to take 20% or 30% of the market share. If global demand for dollars drops by 20%, those surplus dollars come rushing back to the United States. It triggers a hyperinflationary loop that the Federal Reserve cannot stop. We rely on the world needing our money. China has just given the world a choice. And in the next section, I'm going to show you the data that proves the world is already making that choice. We are going to look at the silent exodus of central banks dumping treasuries. We are going to look at the secret gold flows. And I'm going to show you the specific date, the event horizon, where this process becomes irreversible. The machine is running. The countdown has begun. Politicians lie, central bankers equivocate, but money never lies. If you want to know the truth about the American economy, you don't watch the White House press briefings, you watch the flow of capital. And right now, the capital is screaming. We have described the $12 trillion machine that China built. Now let's look at the logs. Let's look at the hard data that proves this machine has been switched from standby to active. Here are the three smoking guns that the mainstream media refuses to show you. For 30 years, the bedrock of the global economy was a simple trade. America buys cheap Chinese goods, and China takes those dollars and buys U.S. Treasury bonds. It was the loop that kept U.S. interest rates low and American shelves full. That loop is broken. In the last 24 months, China has ruthlessly slashed its holdings of U.S. treasuries. They have gone from holding over $1 trillion in American debt to under $800 billion. That is a reduction of more than $200 billion in just 2 years. This isn't just portfolio rebalancing. This is a liquidation. They are selling the debt of their adversary. And they are doing it systematically, quietly, ensuring they get their money out before the crash they know is coming. Where's that money going? It's not going into euros. It's not going into yen. It is going into the only asset that has survived every empire collapse in history, gold. Officially, China reports they have increased their gold reserves by about 70% recently, holding around 2,000 tons. But if you talk to the commodity traders in London and Zurich, the guys who actually move the metal bars, they will tell you a very different story. Unofficial estimates suggest China's actual gold holdings are closer to 5,000 tons. They are buying through proxies. They are paying premiums to keep it off the books. They are vacuuming up every ounce of physical gold they can find. Why? Because when you prepare to kill a fiat currency, the dollar, you need to be holding the antidote, gold. They are preparing for a gold-backed yuan, a currency with intrinsic value, a currency that looks the US dollar in the eye and asks, what backs you? Debt? Smoking gun. The SIPS explosion. This is the data point that proves the alternative system is already winning. CIPS is China's answer to the Western SWIFT payment system. For years, Western analysts laughed at it. They called it a toy. Nobody is laughing now. In 2022, CIPS processed about 100 trillion yuan in transactions. In 2023, that number jumped to 150 trillion yuan. That is a 50% increase in volume in a single year. This isn't a test pilot, this is a highway. And right now, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and Argentina are driving semi-trucks full of money down that highway, bypassing the US toll booth entirely. But all of this, the gold, the selling, the systems, is just the setup. There's a date, a specific deadline that signals when the preparation ends and the demolition begins. In November 2023, the Chinese government issued a directive that went almost completely unnoticed by the Western press. They ordered their state-owned enterprises, the massive companies that control China's wealth, to divest from Western markets within 3 years. Divest. That is a polite word for get out. Do the math. November 2023 plus 3 years is November 2026. That is the deadline. That is the event horizon. We are currently in the final window. The $8 trillion to $12 trillion of Chinese capital trapped in the West is moving now. They are clearing the decks. They are repatriating their wealth. They are making sure that when they pull the plug on the U.S. economy, they aren't standing in the water. So what happens when the clock hits midnight? What happens when the deadline passes and the machine is fully unleashed? In the next section, I'm going to walk you through the stage 4 scenario. I will show you exactly how the collapse unfolds day by day. The bond crash, the supply chain freeze, the inflation spike. This isn't speculation. It is the mathematical certainty of what happens when the world's biggest creditor decides to foreclose on the world's biggest debtor. We have seen the preparation. We have seen the timeline. Now, I'm going to show you the event itself. When the clock strikes midnight, likely within the 2026 divestment window, stage 4 begins. It won't be chaotic. It won't be random. It will be a controlled demolition. A synchronized 3-step attack designed to break the American financial spine without firing a single missile. Here's exactly how it unfolds, step by step, based on the playbook China has already written. Step 1, the liquidation, the financial shock. It starts on a Tuesday morning. The markets open, and suddenly there is a wall of sellers in the U.S. Treasury market. China doesn't just sell the $200 billion they've been moving quietly. They dump the remaining $800 billion, all of it, at once. It is a fire sale of American debt. The bond market crashes instantly. Interest rates spike. The 10-year Treasury yield jumps from 4% to 8%, then 10%. Why does this matter to you? Because the U.S. government cannot survive at 10% interest. The interest payments on our $38 trillion debt would exceed all tax revenue combined. The Federal Reserve is trapped. They face the impossible choice. Option A, let rates rise and cause an immediate Great Depression. Option B, print trillions of dollars to buy the bonds nobody else wants, triggering instant hyperinflation. They always choose option B. They turn on the printers. The dollar crashes. And your life savings loses 50% of its purchasing power in weeks. Step 2, the strangulation, the supply shock. While the Fed is panic printing, China triggers step 2. They weaponize the supply chain. They don't cut off exports completely. That would be an act of war. Instead, they do something smarter. They restrict strategic exports. Administrative delays, quality inspections, environmental reviews. Suddenly, the flow of antibiotics stops. China controls 90% of the active ingredients in U.S. medicine. The flow of rare earth minerals stops. China processes 90% of the elements needed for EVs, fighter jets, and iPhones. The flow of semiconductors from Taiwan slows to a crawl. Store shelves in America go empty. Prices for basic goods double, then triple. It creates panic. It creates civil unrest. It shows the American public exactly how dependent they really are. Step 3, the lifeline, the replacement. This is the checkmate. While America is drowning in inflation and shortages, China offers the world a lifeboat. They announced that the $12 trillion system is open for business. We have stable money, they say. Our yuan is backed by gold, our trade routes are open, our supply chains are functioning. But there is a catch. If you want access to their goods, if you want their medicine, their technology, their rare earths, you must pay in yuan or gold. No dollars accepted. Dozens of countries, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, even desperate European nations, will take the deal. Not because they love China, but because they need to survive. The dollar loses its reserve currency status not in a slow fade, but in a sudden collapse. The trillions of dollars held overseas come flooding back to the U.S., causing hyperinflation that makes the 1970s look like a boom time. The American empire ends. The Asian century begins. And here is the hardest truth to swallow. America cannot stop it. We cannot bomb our way out of a supply chain crisis. We cannot print our way out of a currency crisis. We spent 30 years outsourcing our survival to our adversary. We built the trap ourselves. Now, the trap is springing shut. The timeline is set. The divestment order is active. The machine is live. So, what do you do when the system you rely on is marked for demolition? You don't try to save the building. You get out. In the final part of this video, I'm going to show you the exit strategy. I will tell you the specific assets that survive this type of collapse. I will tell you what you need to physically own. And I will explain why this might be the greatest wealth transfer in history, if you are on the right side of the trade. The picture I have painted is dark. The timeline is tight. The threat is real. But I want to tell you something that the mainstream media will never say. This collapse is not a tragedy for everyone. For the uninformed, for the people who trust the system, who keep their wealth in dollars, who believe the politicians, it will be a catastrophe. They will be the victims of history. But for the insiders, for the people who see the pattern, who understand the data, And who act before the crash? This is the greatest opportunity of your lifetime. Wealth is never destroyed. It is merely transferred. It is transferring from the indebted West to the productive East. It is transferring from paper assets to hard assets. It is transferring from the unprepared to the prepared. The question is, which side of the transfer will you be on? You don't have to be a billionaire to position yourself. You just have to do what the central banks are doing. You have to de-dollarize your own life. Here is the 4-step protocol to surviving the $12 trillion collapse. Step 1. Become your own central bank. Look at the People's Bank of China. Look at the central banks of Poland, Singapore, and India. What are they buying? Gold. Not paper gold. ETFs. Not futures contracts. They are buying physical metal. Why? Because gold has no counterparty risk. If the dollar collapses, gold doesn't care. If the power grid goes down, gold is still gold. It is the only asset that is not someone else's liability. If you have 0% of your net worth in precious metals, you are betting 100% on the stability of the US government. Does that sound like a smart bet to you? Step 2. Own what they can't print. In a hyperinflationary collapse, stage 4, the price of everything goes up. But the things that go up the fastest are essential commodities: energy, food, land. The insiders are buying farmland. They are buying oil royalties. They are buying shares in companies that produce copper, uranium, and fertilizer. They are moving their money out of tech stocks, which rely on cheap debt, and into real stuff, which people need to survive. Ask yourself, if the dollar loses 50% of its value tomorrow, does your portfolio own anything real? Step 3. Secure your personal supply chain. We talked about the strangulation phase, the supply chain freeze. You cannot eat gold, you cannot drink oil. Preparedness is not paranoia. It is basic economics. If China cuts off the flow of pharmaceuticals, do you have a 6-month supply of your daily medication? If the grocery stores are empty for 3 weeks, do you have enough food to feed your family? If the power grid becomes unreliable due to cyber warfare, do you have a backup energy source? The time to build your personal supply chain is when the shelves are full. That time is now. Step 4. Geographic diversification. The final step is the most advanced. It is what the Dutch merchants did in 1790. They didn't just move their money, they got a second passport. If you can, get assets outside of the US jurisdiction, hold some gold in Singapore, open a bank account in a neutral country. Ensure that no single government has the power to turn off your entire life with one switch. The $12 trillion de-dollarization machine is active. The divestment deadline of November 2026 is approaching. The Suez moment could happen any day. You have been warned. You have been shown the pattern. You have been given the roadmap. The window of opportunity is closing. Every day you wait is a day the insiders are buying the assets you need, driving the price up. Do not be the person who waits for the crisis to hit the nightly news. By then, it is too late. The exits will be jammed. The gold will be gone. The capital controls will be in place. Be the insider. Be the one who moves early. Now, I know many of you are asking, which specific gold dealer should I trust? What are the exact stocks that profit from a supply chain collapse? How do I actually buy foreign assets? I cannot answer all of that in this video, but in my next upload, I'm going to do a deep dive into the specific Stage 4 portfolio. I will reveal the 3 commodity stocks I'm personally buying right now. I will show you how to buy silver without paying high premiums, and I will break down the crypto lifeboat, which coins survive the regulation purge and which go to zero. You cannot afford to miss that video. Hit the subscribe button, turn on the bell, because the clock is ticking, and the world is changing faster than you think. I'll see you on the other side.